In early 2016, Amec Foster Wheeler was tasked by ADECA's Office of Water Resources with conducting a training on FEMA's RiskMAP tools. The training consisted of overviews of both regulatory and non-regulatory RiskMAP products, as well as in-depth looks at changes since last firm, flood depth and analysis grids, flood risk assessment data, and area of mitigation interest data sets. Each dataset training included a general overview and review of the dataset attributes, as well as a hands-on exercise. The following is part 3 of a 4-part training session.
In our third dataset here, we're going to focus on flood risk assessment. This will be the portion we're going to use table data to link it with the GIS spatial layers we've already gone over to give actual dollar amount losses to go with the flood events. And this assessment is going to rely heavily on, or primarily, on 2 different sources of data. We'll have the Hazard US or HAZUS MR4 average analyzed loss, which came from a nationwide study back in 2010, in which it uses census block information along with default values for homes and businesses in commercial areas, along with flood analysis and depth grids created on their software. And that's also combined with our refined level 2, which we'll get into here in just a second, analysis, which the UDF points that we played with are all examples of level 2, where we have actual real life values based from community data. And where that is applicable, that is used in place of the average analyzed loss data. As for HAZUS, who here has heard of HAZUS before? Show of hands? Yeah. So you guys are very familiar with it, so I won't go too far into it then.
I ain't too familiar, I've just heard it.
Just heard it? Okay. It's a solid point. It's a software from FEMA that takes into account different hazards, earthquakes, hurricanes, and floods, in which case it uses national data sets, so it's not going to be as accurate as a flood studies we obviously do in a watershed or a community basis. But then again, it's better than nothing having that on 10-meter grids and using their flows to get floodplains. So we do have at least some data as opposed to no data using the HAZUS. And with the flood risk assessment, we're able to go down to a census block level, not just a community and citywide level, and actually see thematically, visualization and mapping, what areas will be hardest hit economically. Or if you're worried more about residentials, you can focus purely on residential or percentage of loss, see which commercial, residential, or other is producing the biggest percentage of your loss in a community. Giving a quantifiable number helps when dealing with people who may not be GIS savvy or flood risk savvy in order to convey a point, and also helps improve the ability to identify areas for mitigation interest and prioritizing during case of disaster, knowing which areas will be hit hardest and how to allocate resources accordingly. It's being intended for planners, developers, local officials, emergency managers also. This comes in very handy with. All right, level 1 versus level 2. Level 1, think national data sets with this HAZUS. We're getting 10-meter DEMs, community floods and floodplains are going to be not as accurate. There's not going to be a detailed survey being done, so no detailed studies. Benefit though is you're already processed, so you don't have to go through and create new depth grids, and it's only used when local data is not accessible. Level 2 is going to be more accurate depth grids. We're getting local LiDAR from the communities and watershed, and the modeling is done in more intensive techniques. Building local data gives us more accurate numbers, which gives, of course, more accurate information for you guys to work with in case of disaster. And utilizing the user-defined facilities helps get realistic, real-life values. On the census block area, we went over that in the first section. And it's going to have 3 major tables that we're going to go over with risk assessment related to them. And it's based on the census block ID, which we'll go over that again here shortly. L for linked, underscore RA for risk assessment, then underscore AAL. That's going to be the average analyzed loss. So if you want to see just the stuff that came from HAZUS, you can link it to that. If if you want to see the refined, you do the L_RA refined to see the ones that were done with the county-wide or the watershed-wide studies. And then the one you're going to be most interested with is going to be the composite one, which takes both of those combined, replacing the AAL with the refined. And you'll hear ARV used a lot, the asset replacement value, and that's going to be the total inventory. You'll have building values and contents values. UDF points, you can have we went over those as well, so I'll just cursory how its role in the risk analysis. Has to be fit into a HAZUS input schema, which means a format that HAZUS can read, and it has to do different occupancy styles, and this is because HAZUS is sophisticated enough to have a different damage curve, and it takes a flood depth of 1 foot might affect what it's deemed as a single house dwelling, will affect its loss more than, say, a bank or a hospital or a school. So just to give you an idea of some of the different ones they do, single family dwellings, mobile homes, apartments, nursing homes, all those are different examples of residentials. And commercial gets built down into 10 different groups, everything from average retail, average wholesale, to bank, hospital, medical office. And then industrial, you'll have heavy industrial, light industrial, food, drug, and chemical. And then all the way up to agriculture, church, and then government buildings and educational buildings for schools and colleges. The major tables we're going to talk about, we'll bring them in here and look at them here in just a second. The linked exposure, this is going to be one that links to the political areas we went over in the first section, and this will give a dollar amount to all of the structures that are at risk during a flood. So this is the total value at risk during a flood. It's not saying how much could possibly be lost, but just how much total. So every building that touches a floodplain is total value. And then we'll have the average annualized loss from the 2010 national data set. We talked about that will link to the census blocks. The refined, which will go to the census blocks as well, will be the ones for the new studies. And the composite, which will go to census blocks and do the combination of refined and average annualized loss. And then we'll have the summary, which will give you the actual data numbers gone by each percent recurrence interval by political area. So it'll break down dollar losses for average annualized loss for the 0.2, 1%, 2%, 4%, 10% composite values. And also we'll touch on briefly here the AOMI summary, where it links to political area to give you an idea of which kind of areas of mitigation interest you have in each area. And for those interested, that changes this last firm summary, which will give you a net added, taken out of that nature to change this last firm for community. Let's open up an MXD and try some of those out real quick. Let's add in, first let's add in the political area. It's F_FRD _ POL area. Add that in. I'm going to zoom out to the layer. Then I'm going to add more data. This time I'm going to go out one level. Same area we found the depth grids and analysis grids. And let's go ahead and let's grab the exposure, changes since the last firm, AOMI summary, and do summary there. Everybody have those selected? No, still waiting, okay. All right, everybody good? So we have these in. So first we're going to work on creating a relationship between those tables and the political area. So we'll just right click, then we'll go to Joins Relate, and we'll select Relate. Very good with that. And I'll give you this prompt right here. Choose the field in this layer that relate based upon, and it's related by political name, 1. And here, we're gonna go ahead and relate all these tables, but we'll do it one at a time. But if you were doing just one table, just need one, you could just scroll through here to pick which one you wanted. We'll do exposure first. We'll just call that relate 1, we're fine with that. We'll hit OK. Now let's repeat that for the next 3 as well. Properties, whoops, my bad. Forgot to did that wrong. There we go, joins, relate. And all these are going to join by the political name. De-exposure, as you change this last firm. Relate to, we're fine with that, okay. And let's just repeat that again for our 3rd one. Local name 1. Exposure. Let's do AOMI summary. Hit OK. And then do our last one. Relate. Local name 1. And risk assessment summary. And hit OK. Give everybody a chance to catch up there real quick. So with the relate and join, we have a difference. With the relate, it's not going to tie it onto the attribute table. It's going to just be something when you hit identify, it's going to pop up. So you can't really do much visualization with it, but it's good if you just want to get strict information quickly without having to jumble up the attribute table. So now that we have that, I'm going to zoom in here and just hit identify here. We have Pell City. And it has the layers here for the attributes we saw with the political area. But if we hit this plus sign here, it'll open up our different relationships we see here. So you'll have an extra tab for exposure, change this last firm, AOMI, and the summary. So we'll try the exposure. We'll click that, and it'll give us our information here. It gives us the asset replacement value total, 14.7 million. Has it broken down by residential there at almost 5.7, and then commercial is at 8.3, and then other at 0.7. So that gives you the total exposure there. As you can see what your community has at risk in case of flood, what kind of exposure you have to flood risk. You also could change this last firm. And this is for the floodway. Area in square miles that you have a floodway. Areas increasing, very minimal. Areas decreasing, 0. So your net is going to be that very minimal increase there of that in Pell City. This we have for non-special flood hazard areas. You see here in the location. Total square mile area there. Increase, close to 0.4, decrease. So it's actually increasing almost 0.3 square miles of non-special flood hazard areas. And then that should inversely kind of match here with the net here of the special flood hazard areas. So we'll see a total square mile area of 7.55, 0 increase, slight decrease of almost 0.4, and a net of just close to 0.4. Looks like there's no AMI link to it. If we try for another community, we might see one there. And here we have the risk assessment summary. Click on this. Return period, the 10%. It gives you the total losses here. Building content total losses. I'll say the residential total losses, commercial, other, and then business disruption. And then you go down for the 25-year, 4%. You can check out the values for that. Right here with the 500-year. Then with the 50-year total losses. Then here we have here with the average annual from the prepackaged information. And then with the 1% losses we have here. If you will, go ahead and try to play around with your individual community. Click on it and try to play through it real quick. And here's an example of the AOMI summary here. It was broken by different types. This one's area of significant erosion, dams, other flood risk areas. We'll go over what the different AOMIs are in the next section. And then areas of mitigation success. Yeah, so take a chance to check out your area, check out the losses.
Those figures, is that in dollars or?
Yes, that's in dollars, not round, not
Hundreds or thousands?
yeah, not hundreds of thousands. And the risk assessment, they are rounded based on FEMA standards, where if it's under 100,000, it's rounded to the nearest 10,000. If it's over 100,000, it's rounded to the nearest 100,000. Although exposure itself is not rounded. Oh, excuse me, yes. Yes, exposure is not rounded. Everybody get the gist of that there with the relating the tables to the political area? Any questions about that so far, anything? No? Good? All right. Now let's turn that off and let's bring in the census block data. Right there in the spatial layers. Bring that in. And then we will, let's bring in those tables. Let's bring in the composite table for the census blocks. We'll add data. Same place we found the other tables and the layers. Finally here for the composite. Everybody there? All right, let's bring that table in. And we're going to create a relation the same way we did before. It's right there. And this one's done by, anybody remember what we relate this to?
Census block ID?
Correct, census block ID. And we'll go down to composite. Hit that. There we go. Relate one's fine. Hit OK. And as we can see, one of the shortcomings here with using just a relation for the instead of a join with the census block area is that not all census block areas are going to have loss because not all of them are going to be within a flood zone. So it's not very good if you're not able to visualize or be able to do some kind of symbology. Otherwise, you're stuck just kind of clicking on census block and seeing your composite losses. But you still can see it if you want to isolate just one single one. This might be better than having to do a join. But this still gives you that option of going along and clicking on an area you know is flooded to see what kind of gives you population asset replacement value total, residential, contents, things of that nature. Right. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here briefly. So here are the tables we talked about. We have in your binders there, we have this thing just for you guys keeping, because I know that all these abbreviations can get kind of cumbersome at this point. You guys have been hit with acronyms and abbreviations for everything, so we have a little cheat sheet there to go with your data. And here's another example of what the little plus things look like to identify the call outs on the identify once you have everything related. Similar to how we just went over there. And these, for the summary, these are going to account for exactly what you see in the flood risk report, and these dollar values here with the total inventory. This number here is going to come from the exposure, and these all come from those different return periods you see within the summary. And here's a rounding I was telling you about. Losses shown nearest 10,000 if it's under 10,000, or under 100,000, 10,000 up to 100,000, and then to the nearest 100,000 once it's over 100,000. Okay, so we talked about relation. That's being an easy way to extract, especially with a political area, to get just information for your community if you're just wondering specifics about things in the table. It's probably honestly a lot easier to do that than it would be to flip through a 200-page report to find specifically your community. But both are there, one in tabular format for GIS, one for reporting. Now we're talking about joining and how joining will actually, similar thing as to relating, but it will bring in the actual attributes, and we'll go over that. I'm sure most of you have familiarity with doing joins. We're also going to show you how to do definition queries again to just pinpoint specific return periods, because a lot of these will have a many-to-one relationship to where when you bring it in, they'll each have one, there'll be many different entries for one census block. And also when doing this, be wary of outliers. We went over the histogram for the raster. Made it easy to see where you have certain outliers that could skew different percentages. Whereas this one you need to be a little wary of conveying, because you can use a lot of power in conveying stuff, and you can kind of know the power and kind of fudging maps sometimes. You want to make sure that you're as honest with the audience as you can be with what you're trying to demonstrate. Now let's go back into ARC catalog real quick. Or, excuse me, ARC map. I'm just gonna wipe these clean. Stretch. We're going to add in we'll start with the political areas. We'll add that back in. And from there, let's add in back in that summary table right here. Right there. Now this time, instead of relate, let's do a join. Make sure you want to join attributes from a table. And we'll select, once again, the political name. Political name's there. All right, summary. Hit OK. Now we open the attribute table. We go across, and you'll see we have all these new attributes are actually in the attribute table now. They weren't there previously. If we identify again. See the 10%. Now let's look at the table, see if there's any problems there. The problem we had there is we tried to do a one-to-one join there, and the issue is each of these can contain up to 6 values. The visualization might be skewed because of that. So what we're going to do is remove that join. Let's go in the table, and for our definition query, we're just entering return period equals, let's say, the 1% chance here. Hit OK. Hit OK here. Let's reopen that. Now we just have 1% for everything. Before, when you did the join, you might get discombobulated with that and not get correct visualization. So now we're going to try the join. Political name, good. Hit OK. Now we hit here. And return period is 1%. As before, when you clicked on something, it would give you one value, but it could be 4%, could be, the 1%, could be the 0.2. So this using definition query before you join in can make sure you isolate the correct return period you want. Now we're free to play with visualization like we wanted to before. Do the properties, symbology, and play with the categories, and we can go by. Down here we do total losses. Or should we do quantities? Sorry. We do total losses. Let's say we just want 4. And you can classify this like you want, or do natural. I like to leave it in default natural breaks unless you see a complete outlier, in which case you might do equal interval like that. But that would, you'd have 2 values that almost has nothing in it. So we'll go with natural breaks. Hit OK. Hit OK. And see the area here for total losses. It looks like it's gas in here. We did the highest. But especially at a county level or watershed level, you can look and see which issues are going on. And you can change this up to other things. You can check business disruption. And this is one of the fascinating ones here is we saw total losses, Talladega County unincorporated didn't have that high, but then business disruption, it has the highest. That's when I was doing the analysis of the area. And you have an idea of why that might be? There's one particular UF point that has a huge role in the business disruption.
Probably
The
the
Super Speedway. I thought it was the Honda plant as well, but the Super Speedway is a point that by far has the highest business disruption factor to it.
That quantified? Is that data from someone or?
HAZUS has it in based on input of total, was it structure value minus, it's total value minus building minus content, has a curve for it based on how it's classified. So it's not a perfect science, but it's one that they pass enough to allow. Yeah, that's one example of how an outlier like that doesn't really give, because what these just Speedway probably, that main business disruption is probably for twice a year, so. Keep an eye on there. Now, I'm with you, I thought it was a Honda plan as well, but. We also can normalize the data. So if you want to see which area has the most residual loss as a percentage of total losses, you can have that value and then normalize it with the total losses. You know, see some of these outlier areas will be the ones most affected by the residential as opposed to commercial or other aspects. The city of Weaver here has a very high percentage, if you get a percentage of total losses. You'll see that more in your town of Steele here. And once again, most of you probably are in charge of just one community, so you probably care less about this and more about the census block and how to normalize that and get different thematic mapping visualization effects from that. So let's bring in the census, let's turn that layer off, and let's bring in the census blocks again. There we go. Hit add. And let's bring in that risk assessment composite table.
In regards to the outlier,
Mm-hmm.
Political areas and census blocks,
Yes.
On the exterior of the watershed,
Mm-hmm.
if you happen to have your community was in two separate watersheds, do the
Yes. values
of the two different watersheds, or do they correlate exactly, or are they?
No, they will be watershed specific. So the exposure is taking into account only areas affected by flood in this watershed.
That watershed?
Yes. Okay. So we will join this. First of all, I almost forgot to go in here and turn on return period. Let's just do the 1% again.
Yeah, that's what happens, yeah. You have to do
Hit OK. And then we will join like we did previously from a table. Census block ID. It's giving me an issue with not letting me join here for a second. Sometimes it does this, if you've already had a relationship in there with the same one, it gives you an issue, so I'm going to restart the MXT just real quickly. Add data. I'll try to catch back up with you guys here. There we go. And now, after you do that join, it's just displaying the census block areas that have a return for the 1% loss there. And now we're free to use symbology. And if you have your political areas, feel free to keep those in as well so you can examine areas within your area of interest. I'm going to do quantities again. And for my value, I'm going to do total losses. And here you can pinpoint specific areas to where you'd expect to see the major losses. And not unexpectedly, you'll see most of it around here along the Coosa, around Gadsden. Bring in political areas here just to help me here. Is everybody able to get that visualization to come up? Everybody got that all right? And once again, if you guys had a certain dollar value that something had to qualify for some specific relief or something like that, you can change this here in your symbology. You can change classifications to 2. Let's say if you had a threshold for which you wanted to cut off for certain relief or something like that, you could go here and change the break value based upon that to get a yes or no. Yes, sir.
Bring your composite in,
Mhm.
then you go back into your layers and try to do a join. You can't see composite.
You can't see composite?
Right.
Where part at?
In the
Sir.
drop, in the dialog box when it opens up, if you have to drop down to pick either exposure or summary or composite, you can't
Did you open a new MXD or do you have the old MXD open?
hold.
Sometimes you'll have to get a new MXD up. Sometimes it'll hang up. I've had experience with that. I'm not sure what the reason is behind that. Maybe you guys might know, but I've had issues before where it won't let me do a join if I have that open.
Okay, thank you.
There, cancel that. Alright. So that gives you kind of an overview there with how to use visualization, thematic mapping here. Go back to the PowerPoint here. There's a slide explaining the visualization with mean to 1. Here's an example of the census blocks being used in composite for thematic mapping. And once again, like we do with political areas, you could normalize the census blocks as well and have like business disruption per total losses, residential per total losses, things of that nature. Here's an example of a normalization one with the political areas. And before we get to our exercise, anybody have any questions at all about the relating the tabular data or doing joins? Yeah. All right, this we kind of already did, looking into that, so we'll skip this. We've already gone through and did this during this slide. But for this one, if you look in the back of your binders, you should have a actual large enough to write on little sheet here. I want you guys to go through and using relations or joining and fill out these data tables you can for the exercise.